We are standing by the entrance of Castle Pinckney here on Chutes Folly, and we are the proud authors of a 2024 book called Holding Charleston by the Bridle. We got that title from a 1861 London Times article where the reporter was describing the fortifications of the Charleston Harbor, and he said whoever controlled Castle Pinckney held Charleston by the bridle because the guns could reach the city of Charleston, which you see behind us. And it's a dramatic enough statement that goes back all the way to the succession crisis, even to the American Revolution. Whoever controlled this island and this fort controlled the fate of Charleston, South Carolina.
We're standing here at Chutes Folly Island on the south end. Castle Pinckney's behind us. But what came before Castle Pinckney was Fort Pinckney. Fort Pinckney was constructed just after the American Revolution ended. It was made out of mud, brick, earth, sod, and it remained in use for a number of years until it was destroyed by 2 hurricanes. It was decided after that to build a more significant structure out here, which is Castle Pinckney, as you see here. The castle was started in construction about 1809 and completed before the beginning of the War of 1812.
It was designed by Jonathan Williams, who was the superintendent of West Point. It's built on a French design. He sent one of his young engineers, Andrew McComb, all of 26 years old, who supervised the construction of this impressive fort. Welcome to Castle Pinckney. Built in 1809, this is one of the great examples of a second system coastal fort in the United States. It's easy to forget that we were once 13 states, each of which faced the ocean. And so these forts were critical for the defense of America. And this, in 1809, was a state-of-the-war fortification built along French designs. So it's January 1861, and this castle is being garrisoned by 3 Charleston militia civilian soldiers. And here at this sally port on the evening of January 7th at about 10 p.m., a tragedy is going to take place. And a soldier, Robert Little Holmes of the Carolina Light Infantry, is coming to his duty station. It's dark. He's running across the parade ground, and he is confronted here at the entrance by a member of the Irish Mar Guard who was only a teenager, and he asks Holmes for a password, and Holmes cannot remember it off the top of his head. The rifle goes off, he's hit in the shoulder, and he will die within 20 minutes. And you can make a fair argument that Robert Little Holmes is the first casualty of the American Civil War. I am standing at the sally port or entrance to Castle Pinckney. This is actually at the back of the castle. The castle is shaped as a horseshoe, and as you came in here, you would literally go under the barracks, which was a 2-story brick building, into the parade ground. And here a sentry would stand. The guardhouse would be right here, and everything that came in the castle had come through this door right here.
We're standing on the eastern side of Castle Pinckney, and approximately the spot that George Cook took one of his most famous photographs of the castle, taken while it was being used as a prison for Union soldiers captured at the Battle of First Bull Run, First Manassas. In the background you can see Charleston, you can see the steeples of the churches. If you compare this to the photograph that George Cook took, you can actually see the barracks, you can see the Charleston Zouave cadets standing on the veranda, some of the Union prisoners down in the parade ground, and you can actually directly see Charleston behind it, so you can actually correlate the steeple of the churches with the barracks. And as I said, Cook was one of the most famous photographers, especially in the South, and his studio on King Street in Charleston became a hot spot for people wanting their photographs taken during the war. We're standing on roughly what would have been the veranda on the second floor of the veranda, part of the officers' quarters. We're looking south towards James Island. In the distance you can see the island there. In the photograph that George Cook took when he was here taking photographs of the prisoners and the Zouave cadets, the island itself, or James Island, is obscured by the wall, but you can actually see the Zouave cadets would have been sitting on the wall. on the parade ground, you can see the casemates. You can see casemate number 7 is identified with the little sign above the door. The federal prisoners that are obviously down in the parade ground are obviously looking up at George taking the photograph, and the Zouave cadets are at leisure, kind of sitting on the ramparts, you know, having their photograph taken for posterity. Right now we're standing on the south side of Castle Pinckney, facing towards the channel. You've obviously got Fort Sumter out there in the harbour, and James Island is over there. In 1860 and 61, along this entire rampart would have been an arc of 24-pounder cannons that had been mounted on carriages on barbette to fire over the top of the wall at any ship trying to enter the harbour at that particular time. Again, these would have been cannons lined up, ready to protect Charleston Harbor, protecting the channel, and this is what was here in 1860-61 when South Carolina seized the castle. I'm standing right now on what was the foundational floor for the warehouse that was added by the Lighthouse Bureau. We are quite lucky in knowing that when they came in and built the foundation for the warehouse, they actually inserted a layer of concrete on top of the rampart. So the foundation for the warehouse actually sits on about 6 to 8 inches of sand, which is actually protecting the top section of the rampart, which you can see here. You've got this to the floor of the warehouse. There's a small gap between the two, and then on here is the actual rampart, top of the rampart on top of the casemates, and underneath that is the casemate walls, which you would actually be able to dig straight down and get to the access to the casemates where the heavy guns would have been in 1861. I'm here back again on the east side of Castle Pinckney. Behind us is Mount Pleasant. What's directly behind me here is what was the old oil house for the warehouse, where the oil would have been stored. Underneath us right now, you can actually see, I'm going to come down here, this is the roof of the casemates and the rampart, and you can see the casemate wall, which would obviously go down to what would have been the parade ground. It's interesting, this particular casemate, because this is the casemate that in 1861 was used as the castle's dungeon. We know the name of the Union soldier that was kept in there. His name was Tuttle. He was kept in there for a couple of days, and it's quite interesting actually being able to stand on the spot where we know he actually was. And we've actually got his diary and his record, so we can actually place him in this particular point at that particular time. In December 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Castle Pinckney at this particular time was garrisoned with only a few federal officers or federal soldiers and a few workmen that were working on reinforcing the castle. We are standing here on the west side of the castle. Charleston is directly behind or in front of me, and over on my left hand side is James Island. In the background you can see Fort Sumter. Anderson would evacuate Fort Moultrie, moving his garrison over to Fort Sumter, setting fire to the gun carriages, chopping down the flagpole at Fort Moultrie. Governor Pickens, who was in Charleston at that particular time, worried that what Anderson was going to do, so he decided to order the militiamen out from Charleston to seize Castle Pinckney here and also seize Fort Moultrie. Early in the evening, about 150 militiamen came over, landed at this dock here, divided into 2 sections. One section went round to the south side, the sally port, banged on the door. The gate was not opened, so Johnston Pettigrew, who was in charge of the militiamen, ordered his men over the wall using scaling ladders. Pettigrew's men landed here using scaling ladders, scaled the wall. They were unopposed, but this was a siege of a federal installation by a foreign country, or what South Carolina considered them to be, an independent country. So you could argue that this was possibly the first offensive action against the federal government of what was to become the Civil War, or the war between the states. There was no resistance offered to any of the militiamen. The castle was seized peacefully. Inside there was a flag ceremony. The federal flag was lowered, but the militiamen had forgotten actually to bother to bring with them a flag to raise in its place. So they used the only flag that they had at that time, and that was the flag off for the little steamboat they come over called the Nina. It was a red flag with a white star in the middle, and they had a little ceremony where that flag was raised after the federal one had been removed.
I am standing next to 2 giant Columbiad cannons that have been recently found by the archaeologists. These guns weigh 13,500 pounds each. They are 10-inch smoothbore guns made early in the war at Tregeter Iron Works in Richmond. These guns were smoothbore. At the end of the war, there were 3 of these guns and 1 7-inch Brook gun. The Brook gun was rifled, which meant it could fire longer as the cannonball spun. But the advantage of a smoothbore gun was when you fired a shell, it would skip along the water and could hit a ship right at its at the water line, where the ship would be extremely vulnerable. It's amazing to me these guns even got here as much as they weigh. In the 1880s, Castle Pinckney is empty. It's falling apart, it's deteriorating. It is given by the War Department to the Federal Lighthouse Bureau, and they will turn this into a depot. And it's mostly buildings outside of the fortress itself that were warehouses and repair shops. There was a large wharf. There was a ship assigned to this place called the Wisteria. It was a big tender ship because it tended to the 65 lighthouses from North Carolina all the way to Florida. In 1893, a hurricane comes through here and does severe damage to all these buildings that are outside the fortress. So a decision is made to reconvert Castle Pinckney into the actual spot for the warehouses of the Lighthouse Bureau. So about 8 feet of wall is torn down all around the castle and thrown in the middle, and all this dirt is brought in here. And so basically they level off the inside of Castle Pinckney. And inside of it is a giant supply warehouse is built here, and I am standing next to the remains of the Lighthouse Depot's home. So this was the keeper's house, and this is the old fireplace that remains of it. Behind me is a cistern where the water was kept, and he and his family. His name was James Whitley. He was Whiteley. I'm sorry. He was a Englishman, and his family lived here. They had 10 children that lived here, and every day they got in a boat and they rowed over to Charleston, where they went to school. It's an amazing story. I am standing by the eastern side of Castle Pinckney, and this is a giant reinforcement wall that was built by the Confederates to protect the munitions and powder room, the magazine of Castle Pinckney, from artillery shelling. And Signalman Thomas Lowndes would write in his journal about 1863 that in a gun battle between Union ironclads and Fort Sumter, the sound, the concussion coming off the water was so loud and vibrating that it actually put a split right in this wall. So this is a dramatic representation of the Civil War right here. We're on the eastern side, and you can see that the water level here is right up against the castle itself. And I am told from the Post and Courier that the sea level of the Charleston Harbor is a foot higher than it was in 1900, and it's expected to only get higher. So we have some real challenges here to save this historic site.
And in that vein, we're working currently, hoping to talk to the Army Corps of Engineers in order to help us in our preservation efforts. But again, as Cliff said, we've got a real challenge here to save this historic monument for history, posterity, and basically as a centerpiece for the middle of Charleston Harbor.
Amen, brother.
Thank you very much for joining us as we tour Castle Pinckney here in Charleston Harbor. Look forward to seeing you soon.